Welcome back to David Roman, the channel where we break down the mechanics of modern warfare in a way that actually makes sense. If you are new here, consider subscribing, because what we cover on this channel is the kind of analysis that goes beyond headlines and gets into the real story of how wars are fought, won, and lost. And today's story is one of the most extraordinary aerial operations in modern military history. 3 generations of American air power, one sustained methodical campaign, and a country whose entire military doctrine was essentially dismantled from the sky. We are talking about Operation Epic Fury, the US-led bombing campaign against Iran, and specifically how America deployed its B-2, B-1, and B-52 bombers in a sequence so precisely choreographed that each wave of strikes set up the next one perfectly. By the time all 3 generations of bombers had done their work, Iran's air defenses, ballistic missile capabilities, naval assets, command and control infrastructure, and nuclear facilities had been reduced to ruins. And we are going to walk through exactly how it happened, step by step. Let's start at the beginning. It all started with the B-2 Spirit, the crown jewel of the US bomber fleet. The B-2 was the perfect choice for the shock and awe opening of Operation Epic Fury, and not just because of its reputation. This is a multi-role bomber with world-leading stealth capabilities, an aircraft specifically engineered to penetrate the most sophisticated air defense networks on Earth without being detected. Iran had spent years and billions building up its air defense infrastructure. None of it mattered when the B-2s came calling. The operation kicked off on February 28th. 4 B-2 stealth bombers departed from their home bases in the United States and began an extraordinary journey. With no UK basing support at that stage, the B-2 pilots were looking at 30-hour-plus round trips, sustained only by aerial refueling from KC-46 tankers that were positioned with surgical precision along the route. The B-2's standard range of 6,000 nautical miles was not enough to reach Iran and return without that support, so the tankers became as critical to the mission as the bombers themselves. The B-2s flew over the Strait of Gibraltar, were refueled multiple times, and arrived over Iranian airspace during a window when US and Israeli fighter jets had already begun systematically dismantling Iran's radar networks and surface-to-air missile sites. By the time the B-2s descended toward their targets, the path had been partially cleared, and then the B-2s did what they were built for. Each B-2 can carry up to 40,000 pounds of munitions. On February 28th, they carried 2,000-pound bombs, most likely BLU-109 bunker busters attached to JDAM guidance kits. These weapons have been in service since Operation Desert Storm, and they remain among the most effective tools ever developed for collapsing underground fortifications. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin, citing a US official, confirmed what the B-2s were after: Iran's hardened ballistic missile sites, specifically the underground missile cities that Iran had spent decades building and protecting. Now, here is what makes Iran's missile cities genuinely impressive as engineering projects, and genuinely dangerous as military assets. These are not simple storage bunkers. They are massive underground complexes with multiple entrances, multiple exits, vast internal networks of tunnels, and the capability to not just store Iran's ballistic missiles, but to launch them directly from underground. Iran had touted these facilities repeatedly as proof that its missile arsenal was invulnerable to conventional air attack. For years, that boast carried some weight. February 28th is when that boast was definitively proven wrong. The B-2s were not trying to blow up the missile cities from the inside. 2,000-pound bombs, for all their destructive power, cannot level a complex of that scale. Instead, the B-2s targeted something far more specific and far more lethal in its consequences: the tunnel entrances, the access points, the structural nodes that hold the whole network together. BLU-109 bunker busters, dropped with precision from stealth aircraft that Iran's defenses never detected, caved in tunnels, collapsed entrances, and essentially sealed billions of dollars worth of ballistic missiles inside their own fortifications. Those missile cities, once the pride of Iran's military establishment, became enormous underground tombs. The results were immediate and measurable. By March 4th, just 4 days into Operation Epic Fury, Iranian ballistic missile launches had fallen by 86% compared to the opening day. 86%. In less than a week, the weapon system that Iran had spent its entire military doctrine building around had been rendered largely non-functional, and the B-2s did it in a single night. By the end of the first 24 hours of the operation, the B-2s, working alongside stealth fighter jets from the US and Israeli airframes, had struck over 1,000 targets across Iran. Command and control facilities belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps were hit. Iranian naval vessels and submarines were destroyed at port. Air defense systems, already under assault from fighter jets, were further degraded. And among the earliest casualties of the campaign was Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself, Iran's supreme leader, whose death plunged the Iranian command structure into a leadership crisis on top of everything else they were already trying to absorb. Iran had never seen the B-2 coming. That is the entire point of a stealth bomber. And as those 4 aircraft turned around and began their long trips back to their home bases, Iran was left to wonder what America could possibly do next that could match what it had just experienced. Here is the first question I want you to think about. Drop your answer in the comments below because I am genuinely curious what you think. Before this operation, Iran had spent decades and enormous resources hardening its military infrastructure against exactly this kind of attack. So what does it tell you about the gap between conventional air defense systems and the capabilities of modern stealth technology when everything Iran built was rendered useless in a single night? Now, let's talk about what came next. With the B-2s safely back home and Iran's air defenses already critically degraded, the US made a deliberate strategic decision. The next waves of attacks did not need the same level of stealth. The door had been kicked open. What the operation needed now was volume, speed, and the ability to carry enormous quantities of ordnance across the distance between the United States and Iran. Enter the B-1B Lancer. On March 1st and March 10, the US deployed its B-1 bombers and follow-up strike packages that Iran had absolutely no ability to stop. And when you understand the B-1 specifications, you understand why this was such a devastating escalation. Yes, the B-1 is older than the B-2. Yes, it lacks the same stealth profile, but the B-1B Lancer can fly at supersonic speeds, making it one of the fastest bombers in the American arsenal. And more importantly, for what the US needed in early March, it can carry up to 75,000 pounds of ordnance, nearly double the B-2's maximum payload. 3 B-1 bombers flew from Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. Like the B-2s before them, they flew the entire route without landing, sustained by aerial refueling tankers. U.S. Central Command confirmed the mission in a public statement on March 2nd, quoting the president's stated objective directly: to destroy Iran's missiles and raze its missile industry to the ground. The B-1s were sent to finish what the B-2s had started. Where the B-2s had sealed the missile cities, the B-1s came to take out whatever survived the first night. The infrastructure around those facilities, the support networks, the secondary launch sites and production assets, multiple follow-up waves that Iran had no ability to contest. Among the weapons the B-1s brought with them were JDAMs and AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles, standoff weapons that allow bombers to release their payloads from a safe distance without entering the immediate threat radius of any surviving air defense systems. Even a degraded air defense network retains some residual capability, and the US was not taking unnecessary risks with its most capable airframes. The B-1s struck their targets, turned around, and flew home. Meanwhile, America's fighter jets, from F-15s to F-35s, were working continuously across Iran, establishing air superiority by destroying whatever remained of Iran's radar and missile systems. The coordination between bombers and fighters was seamless. The fighters cleared the sky while the bombers took apart the ground infrastructure. By the end of March 2nd, after 3 days of continuous combined operations, President Trump publicly declared that Iran's air defenses were gone, along with its navy, air force, and leadership. By March 5th, the number of US strikes had exceeded 2,000, including more than 20 Iranian warships taken out of commission, and this is where the operation shifted gears entirely. With Iran's air defenses essentially destroyed and air superiority firmly established, the US no longer needed to deploy only its most advanced and expensive airframes to get the job done. What the operation needed now was sustained pressure. Relentless, continuous bombing that gave Iran no time to repair, reorganize, or reconstitute anything. For that mission, the US reached back to the oldest bomber in its fleet, the one that has been doing exactly this job for 70 years, the B-52 Stratofortress. Now, if you have been enjoying this breakdown and you want to follow this story as it continues to develop, this is a good time to subscribe to David Roman if you have not already. Every week, we cover this level of depth on the conflicts and military operations that are reshaping the world. No noise, no filler, just the real picture of what is happening and why it matters. Back to the B-52. The B-52 has been in service since the 1950s. That fact alone stops most people in their tracks. But here is the thing about the Stratofortress. Age has not diminished it. Its engines have been updated. Its avionics have been modernized. Its weapons integration has been expanded. And according to the US Air Force, the B-52 is capable of dropping or launching the widest array of weapons of any airframe in the current American arsenal. It can carry 70,000 pounds of ordnance, and it can fly up to 9,000 miles without refueling. The US Air Force expects to keep it in active service through at least 2050. There is a great deal of life left in this aircraft. From March 3 onward, the B-52s took over as the primary instrument of sustained attrition against Iran, and their role was different from what the B-2s and B-1s had done. The B-2 had delivered precision strikes against the most hardened targets on the opening night. The B-1s had hammered the missile infrastructure across 2 days of follow-up waves. The B-52s were now responsible for something more grinding, more continuous, and arguably more effective over time: the systematic dismantling of everything that remained. The UK played a crucial role in making this phase of the campaign possible. From March 1st, British bases, specifically RAF Fairford, were made available to American bombers. This eliminated the need for the massive round-trip sorties that had taxed the B-2s and B-1s during the opening days. B-52s could now fly to Iran, drop their ordnance, land at RAF Fairford, refuel, rearm, and go again. A rotation was established that ensured at least one B-52 was over Iran at any given time. For Iran's surviving military leadership, that meant the bombing never stopped, not for a single day. CENTCOM confirmed B-52 operations on March 3rd, and the target list expanded significantly. Command and control centers that had already been struck were hit again to ensure nothing was being rebuilt. Missile production facilities became priority targets, because with its launch sites being steadily destroyed, Iran's only long-term option was to produce new missiles, and the US was determined to close that path as well. The sustained campaign worked. By March 11th, the United States was reporting that more than 5,500 targets had been struck across Iran. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 500 targets hit per day on average across the entire operation. The arrival of the B-52s drove that number from roughly 2,000 on March 5th to over 5,500 by March 11th. More than 3,500 additional targets in a single week of sustained bombardment. And it was not just the B-52s doing the work. By March 11th, with UK bases fully operational, the US had assembled a remarkable bomber force at RAF Fairford. Reports indicated 15 American bombers actively flying strike missions against Iran, including a combination of B-52s and B-1Bs. The B-1s had returned, and this time they were being loaded differently. Alongside the AGM-158 JAS SMs and precision-guided munitions, the BLU-109 2,000-pound bunker busters were back in the weapons loadout. At the same time, missile delivery systems were being removed from the B-1s, a telling detail confirming something important. The US had achieved complete air supremacy over Iran. When you no longer need standoff range, when you are comfortable flying directly over a country's airspace without defensive systems on your bombers, you have won the air war decisively. The expanded target list reflected that reality. Large industrial complexes, weapons production facilities, and sites connected to Iran's nuclear program became the next priorities. And then came perhaps the most significant single strike of the entire campaign. Post-strike analysis of Iran's Taliban 2 nuclear site revealed something that no amount of Iranian hardening had been able to prevent. Following a previous joint US and Israeli operation, Operation Midnight Hammer, conducted in the summer of 2025 against Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran had worked intensively to protect Taliban 2. Thick layers of concrete were poured over the facility. Massive mounds of soil were piled on top. The combination was specifically designed to defeat the BLU-109 bunker busters used in earlier strikes. By conventional measures, Taliban 2 had been made essentially impenetrable. What it could not survive was the GBU-57B massive ordnance penetrator. At 30,000 pounds, the GBU-57 is not simply a larger version of the BLU-109. It is a fundamentally different weapon, engineered specifically to defeat the deepest and most heavily reinforced underground facilities on Earth. It penetrates far deeper before detonating, and the explosive force destroys everything within its radius with a thoroughness that no amount of concrete or soil can absorb. Post-strike analysis of Taliban 2 told the story clearly. 3 precise, distinct penetration points in the soil above the facility. 3 bombs, 3 hits. The B-2 was the only aircraft in the American fleet capable of delivering that weapon in that configuration, which made the attribution clear. Iran had hardened one of its most critical nuclear assets against everything it believed America could throw at it. America threw something Iran had not accounted for, and the result was the same as it had been on February 28th. Iran's defenses were overcome. And here is the second question I want you to think through and leave in the comments, because this one has real implications beyond the immediate conflict. Iran spent years and enormous resources making Taliban 2 apparently impenetrable. The US neutralized it anyway with a weapon system that most people had never heard of before this operation. So does this change how you think about nuclear deterrence and underground facility hardening as a strategic concept for any country, not just Iran, going forward? As of the time this was written, the campaign had not stopped. B-52s were still flying rotation strikes from RAF Fairford. 12 B-1Bs were staged and ready for continued precision operations, and the B-2s were clearly still active. 3 holes above Taliban 2 made that irrefutable. What Operation Epic Fury revealed, more than anything else, was the extraordinary gap between what America's multi-generational bomber fleet is capable of in a permissive environment and what any nation on Earth is realistically able to do to stop it. The B-2 created the conditions, the B-1s exploited them at scale, the B-52s sustained the pressure indefinitely. 3 bombers from 3 different eras of American aviation, used in precise sequence, each one enabling the next, and the result was the effective collapse of Iran's military infrastructure over roughly 2 weeks. Whether Iran's regime ultimately submits or whether the campaign escalates further is a question only those inside the White House and the Pentagon can answer with certainty. What is certain is that America's bomber doctrine has been demonstrated at a scale and effectiveness the world has not seen since the Second World War. If today's breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what actually happened and how it was engineered, take 30 seconds and leave a comment below. What part of this surprised you the most? The coordination, the scale, the fact that a 70-year-old aircraft is still doing this kind of damage? Tell me what stood out. I read every single comment, and the conversation down there is one of the best parts of running this channel. This is David Roman. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.